Okay, thank you all for joining us today for the Grad School Prep Series entrance exams. Today joining us is Clay Cooper, attorney and president and founder of the Cooper Test Prep. He's going to provide us with an introduction to the test, the format, content, media, how to prepare for it, some resources for further study, and then some general test prep advice. So I'm going to hand it over to him to get started.
Thank you, Alexis. Can everybody hear me?
I think so.
Great, awesome. I will have the chat turned on as well as I go. So if anyone has a question that they want to throw into the chat, I'll see it as well, at least if it's chatted to everyone publicly, just FYI. So hello and welcome. Thank you for letting me be here. Let me come speak, Alexis and everyone else with the Grad Rebel Advantage program. As Alexis mentioned, my name is Clay Cooper. I'm going to be speaking a little bit today about the GRE, what you need to know about it, how to prepare for it, how much to panic now, how much to panic later, all that good stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Let me just kind of go over the agenda briefly, and then we will jump right in. So I will introduce you to myself briefly, and then we'll talk about the test kind of big picture. We'll talk about section level adaptation. Section level adaptation is the computer adaptive testing algorithm, let's call it, that the GRE uses. Then we'll look at the quantitative section a little bit, and we'll look at the verbal section a little bit. In each case, we'll do some practice problems. And then we'll talk about like big picture preparation tips. I will take some questions at the end, and then we'll wrap it up. But again, you can throw your questions into the chat at any point if you'd like to do that. I have got, let's see where I did have the chat showing on my screen. There we go. I do have it showing on my screen now. So can everybody access the chat and just say yeah or no or good? Cool. Awesome. So I'm really grateful to be here. I can't wait to talk about this stuff and nerd out about the test. I think it's going to be awesome. So before we get started, let me just tell you a little bit about myself, just so you have some idea of why it is that I am here speaking about the GRE today. And this part of the talk is basically shameless flexing on my part, so please forgive me. It's not my favorite part. I promise I don't go around talking about this stuff in real life, but I'm about to spend an hour or more telling you about the test, so I want you to understand why I talk about it. So as Alexis mentioned, I am a law school alum at UNLV. I went to the Boyd School of Law, graduated magna cum laude. I am now a practicing trial attorney here in Las Vegas. I've had 6 trials thus far, 6 jury trials thus far in 2021. But I'm also president and founder of Cooper Test Prep. So before becoming an attorney, I had a pretty long career, or long for me anyway, in the test prep industry. Worked in it for over a decade. Spent a lot of that time as a senior director of product and operations for a Shark Tank test prep company that's based here in Las Vegas. So I was in charge of all of our products and all of our instructors. I have a 99.8 percentile or higher score on the GRE, GMAT, LSAT, IC. I've got perfect scores on the SAT, the ACT, and the PSAT. So I've also passed the Nevada and California bar exams as well. And again, I know this is super obnoxious, just some nerd on the internet talking about his test scores, but I assure you the goal here is to like build credibility, right? Why you should care what I think about these tests. So let's see, I've had thousands of students. My students have seen dramatic score increases. I've had students admitted to every one of the Ivy League colleges, students admitted to every one of the top 14 law schools, students admitted to Harvard, Stanford, Yale, students admitted to Lee Business School, Boyd Law School, etc. You can read this. You don't need me to hit it point by point. I will just know 2 perfect scores on the SAT, 1 on the ACT, 1 on the PSAT, 99.8 percentile or higher scores on a bunch of different tests. Through my company, Cooper Test Prep, I offer GRE prep, LSAT prep, bar prep, GMAT prep, SAT, ACT, and PSAT prep. But graduate school tests are my specialty. Graduate school tests are far more interesting than the high school tests, and they're far more challenging as well. So I love talking about them. This is getting to yell at students like yourselves about all this nerd stuff is my favorite thing in the world. So you can check out my company's website at cooperprep.com. And again, I offer GRE and GMAT classes and tutoring, among other things. Just for your benefit, this is my personal cell number. Please feel free to use it. Text me, call me if there's any way I can be of help to you as you try and navigate the GRE or whatever test you might end up taking and getting into grad school. I give you this because I want you to use it. Please do. I would love to speak to you. I won't give you a hard sell. I just want to be of help to you however I can, answering your questions. And then that's my personal email. If you're more comfortable with email, that's fine too. So text, call, email, I would love to speak to you. I offer actually in this session today, I've created a little landing page on my website. It's just cooperprep.com/GRA. If you go here and give me your name and email, I will send you a copy of my slides from today, which you might find useful. It's a lot of good information in there. And then I'll also send you a coupon code just in case you're interested in a course or a tutoring product. So all you got to do is go to cooperprep.com/GRA for Grad Rebel Advantage. Give me your name and email and let me know what you'd like, and I'll send it to you. One more thing real quick before we jump in. I do have a live in-person GRE course coming up at UNLV. It's going to be 3 weeks long. Starts on October 19th. So that's what, I think 2 weeks from yesterday. It's only $650 if you use the coupon code specific to this group, UNLV GRA. There will be 18 hours. So we have 6 3-hour lessons. It's going to happen on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. So we'll have a 3-hour lesson twice a week for 3 weeks, 18 course hours. I think it's going to be a great value. If you're at all interested in taking the GRE anytime soon, I urge you to consider it. I take pride in over-delivering on these courses. I really want to help you as much as I can. So check it out. Let me know if you have any questions about it, and I'd love to discuss it with you. All right. So let's talk about the GRE. So how does the GRE work? Well, first of all, how is it administered? The GRE is administered in a secure testing center, or at least that's how it was before COVID, right? And now it's administered remotely as well. So I think that, given my experience with students and these tests, most of us, I think, prefer to take it remotely. You do whatever floats your boat. The secure testing center administration is like super intense. Basically what that means is you go to like a super corporate building and you go through 3 levels of security checks in which they ask you to give a blood sample and a complete history of your life up to that point before they let you in to take the test. So I'm kind of joking, but also it is super serious. I think it's easier to get on an airplane than it is to get in to take the GRE at one of these secure testing. So if you want to go that route, that's fine. It's certainly available to you. You can do it anytime, or you can schedule to do the GRE remotely in the comfort of your own home. That could be a great option. Again, I think most of us prefer that these days, but I will say that it presents its own challenges. If you're going to take the GRE remotely in your home, you need to do a good job of securing your test environment. In other words, you need to make sure it's quiet. You need to make sure you won't be disturbed. You need to make sure the dog's not going to need to go out halfway through the section and stuff like that. So I've heard some actual horror stories about people taking tests at home. I'm sure you all have experienced them yourselves. We're almost 2 years into this pandemic, so it's not new to most of us. But keep those things in mind if you're going to take it remotely. The GRE is composed of 3 section types. We have the analytical writing assessment section, the quantitative section, and the verbal section. The analytical writing assessment section, as you can imagine, is a section in which you do some writing. It's very interesting, and it absolutely is worth talking about. I'm not going to talk about it much today just because it's kind of beyond the scope of this discussion. I think we're going to stay focused more today on the multiple choice, or at least the objective portions of the test rather than the analytical writing assessment. However, if you do have questions about it, if you want to learn more, reach out to me. Again, I'd love to talk to you about it. But we're going to stay focused today on the quantitative and verbal parts. If you notice, I put SLA in parentheses beside each of these. What that means is these are the 2 portions of the test, the 2 sections of the test, I should say, that employ this computer adaptive testing algorithm. And I'll talk about what that means in just a minute. Okay. But first, let's hit some high points about how the test works, right? Like, what is it actually like as I'm taking it? It's important to note that on the GRE, you can skip, return, or change your answers to questions within a given section, right? So within one section, I can skip around, I can go back to questions, I can change my answers. That's important to note because that is dissimilar to the GMAT, for instance. A lot of people, I think, consider the GRE and the GMAT to be very similar, and that's true. And if you've looked at all into the GMAT, I'm sure you're aware of the similarities. But this is one of the major differences. The GRE does allow us to skip around, whereas the GMAT doesn't. Conversely, in the GRE, you cannot choose your own section order, whereas on the GMAT, you can. And there is a mark and review option. In other words, you have the ability to mark a question so that you can come back and look at it later on the GRE. There is some research showing, or purporting to show anyway, that doing that is beneficial to your score. In other words, there are data that seem to support the idea that marking something for review and coming back later and taking another look at the question can improve your score. I don't actually disagree with that necessarily. That may or may not be true, but I do think that the research that purports to support it is biased. That might be a little bit too in the weeds for today's presentation, but if you want to nerd out about data and standardized testing, hit me up. We'll talk about it. It'd be great. We'll have a Zoom session in which we critique the reviewed work of scientists. There's no penalty for guessing. That is important to know. In other words, you do not lose points by missing a question on the GRE, which means you have to answer every question strategically. You don't, like, by the rules, have to answer every question. But on a test like the GRE, where there is no penalty for guessing, you are dropping the ball hard if you do not answer every question. Does that make sense? Tracking so far? Cool. So no matter what happens, make sure you answer every question on the GRE. If you take the GRE and you leave a question blank, I will show up at your house and yell at you. Okay, so don't do that. You do not have my permission to live your life that way, just so you know. Make sure you answer every question. All right, cool. So here's a breakdown of how the sections look. The analytical writing section comes first. Basically, there are two different sections. You're going to have 30 minutes per task. In one case, you're going to analyze an issue, and in another case, you're going to analyze an argument. Again, I would love to talk to you about that. If you want to talk about it, reach out to me. We're not going to spend too much time on it today. The ones we care about are these verbal reasoning and quantitative reasoning. The verbal reasoning section might more simply be called like the reading and writing section, basically. That is an oversimplification, but it's a useful one. That's basically what it is. And then the quantitative reasoning section might more accurately be called, or not more accurately, excuse me. It might more simply be called the math section. Again, it's a little bit of an oversimplification, but it's helpful to understand it. Note that there are two sections of each of these. In other words, there are two verbal sections and two quantitative sections. In each of those sections, you will have 20 questions. For the verbal sections, you'll get 30 minutes. For the quantitative section, you will get 35 minutes. So if you notice, we'll talk about pacing in a little bit, but your pacing is going to be different in the quantitative section versus the verbal. Not a lot different, but a little bit, okay? Now, you may also face unscored sections or researched sections. The main thing that you all need to know about the unscored and or research sections is that they don't matter, okay? By their very nature, if they are unscored, then they have no bearing on your life, right? The only way they might affect your test taking experience is that if you do get unscored or research sections, obviously your test is going to be longer. There will be more sections to complete, but you almost certainly won't know which sections are unscored in research. In other words, let me give you an example. So you'll have the two analytical writing assessment sections to begin with, and then the rest of the sections come in a random order. So let's say you have a verbal and then a quantitative and then another quantitative and then a verbal and then a quantitative. Well, if you're tracking, you know that that's one more quantitative section than you're supposed to have, right? So where does that third quantitative section come from? Well, it's either unscored or research. Does that make sense? If you end up with more than two quantitative sections, then you know it, one of those, or however many more than two that you have, don't count for you. If you end up with 4 quantitative sections, then 2 of them didn't count for you. But for our purposes, it really doesn't matter because you won't be able to tell the difference as you're going, and they won't tell you which ones count and which. Does that make sense? You just kind of have to take the sections as they come. You don't have any control over the order in which they come. You don't have any control over how many you'll face. That's another reason that practicing realistically is really important, because the experience of facing this kind of obstacle course can be a little bit, a lot challenging and unsettling. So we want to make sure we do some realistic practice so that we're not uncomfortable on test day. I'm going to talk more about that later too. All right, so let's introduce ourselves to the quantitative section. Is everybody awake? All of guys like moving in the chat. Are we alive? Are we already bored? 6 slides into the presentation? That's okay. No worries. All right, let's talk about the quantitative section. So it's format, first of all. As I mentioned, you have 35 minutes to do 20 questions. If you're doing the math at home, that means you have 1 minute and 45 seconds per question. Now, it doesn't actually always work out that way. In other words, I certainly don't want you guessing, or excuse me, I certainly don't want you sweating how long any individual question takes you. Does that make sense? If a question takes you 1 minute and 53 seconds, first of all, if you even notice that an individual question took you 1 minute and 53 seconds, then you're approaching your pacing the wrong way. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's important to know that although this is my average pace I need to stick to, I don't have to measure my pace question by question. In fact, I shouldn't measure my pace question by question. That is a waste of time and brain power. I'm going to tell you how you should measure your pace in just a minute. The vast majority of the questions are multiple choice. It's worth noting that not all of the questions are multiple choice in the quantitative section. There are some in which you will have to enter an answer, enter a number as an answer. If you recall on the SAT, how many of us took the SAT in school? Yeah, me too. And post-high school too, because I'm a professional nerd. But of the participants, how many of us took the SAT? Lots of us? No? Crickets? That's a great question, Angelica. Yes, they are available. You would have to make your case to ETS. ETS is Educational Testing Services. They are the company that produces the GRE. You'd have to kind of prove it to them. But I would look into that for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, making an OP. Great question. Cool. So we've taken the SAT, lots of us, or the ACT. The reason I bring up the SAT versus the ACT, of course, Angelica, is that the SAT has questions in the math section in which you have to write in your answer and then bubble in the corresponding bubbles. You guys know what I'm talking about? I have to like write in 1.5 and then I bubble in the 1 and the decimal and the 5. So you have questions similar to that in the quantitative section of the GRE. You won't have to do the bubbling part, but you will have to do the entering and answer part. As I mentioned, there is no penalty for guessing, which means if you leave a question blank, I will haunt your nightmares for the rest of your life. So don't do that. Whatever happens, don't leave a question blank. The quantitative section does use section level adaptation. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. You will have access to an on-screen calculator during the quantitative section, which is good to know. There are some tests where you don't have a calculator. For instance, the GMAT, you aren't allowed to use a calculator. In one section of the SAT, you're not allowed to use a calculator. On the LSAT, you're not allowed to use a calculator because there's no math on the LSAT because they're just living a different sort of misery. But you will have an on-screen calculator. Don't get too excited about that. Unfortunately, because the on-screen calculator is available to everyone who takes the test, essentially it doesn't actually benefit anyone because the test is, this is a gross oversimplification, but basically the test is scored on a curve. So any advantage that's available to everyone doesn't really benefit anyone, if that makes sense. The flip side of that's really helpful, which is that any disadvantage that affects everyone doesn't actually hurt anyone either. In other words, if you get a question that's monstrously difficult, you don't have to sweat it because on average, the other test takers will have to face the same sort of things. That's good. That can bring you comfort in your darkest hours as you prepare for and take the test. And you will have access to scratch paper as well. But what the scratch paper looks like depends on where you take the test. If you go to the Secure Testing Center and take it, they will probably hand you a booklet. And then they'll like confiscate it from you at the end and they'll examine it under a black light to see if you were communicating in code with dark spirits who were giving you the answer. If you do it at home, you'll have to provide your own scratch paper and there's a whole process for verifying that. But let's talk about section level adaptation. What is this? Section level adaptation is very simply the GRE's, that text is really small. Section level adaptation is the GRE's computer adaptive testing algorithm. Computer adaptive testing means, it is a term, I'm not at all sure that I spelled that correctly, but we'll leave it. Computer adaptive testing means tests that get harder or easier live, depending on how you're doing. Does that make sense? So take, for instance, the SAT or the ACT. Those are not computer adaptive, which means the moment the proctor says go, all of the questions are already determined, right? I just have to go through and answer them. On a computer adaptive test, by contrast, the difficulty of the questions changes depending on how I'm doing. So does everybody understand that? The computer adaptive test, the difficulty of the questions changes depending on how I'm using or how I'm doing. So let's talk about why they do that. First of all, why do they use computer adaptive testing? Long story short, there is reason to believe that computer adaptive testing is a more accurate way to measure the characteristics that these tests are intended to measure. So for instance, one of the characteristics that the GRE is intended to measure is your understanding of certain subjects in math. And computer adaptive testing is thought to be a more accurate way to assess your understanding. And I think that's true. Not that anybody cares what I think about it, but I buy that. My experience has shown that it is a more accurate measure of your ability level. More than that, it allows us to get an accurate assessment in fewer questions. In other words, if we were taking a test on paper, like an old school standardized test, and we wanted the most accurate assessment of our ability, the only way to make it more accurate is to make the test longer and gather more data, so to speak, right? Instead of making these tests longer, what the test publishers like ETS have done is they've chosen to employ really sophisticated computer adaptive testing algorithms. So basically, they can get an accurate assessment while still keeping your test pretty short. So hopefully that makes sense. The idea of computer adaptive testing is to help give them a more accurate measure of your ability without making the test super long. Section level adaptation is the GRE's version of this computer adaptive testing, and it's fairly straightforward. Basically, here's all it means. If you recall, we talked about in the format how you're going to have 2 sections of verbal reasoning and 2 sections of quantitative reasoning, right? All you really need to know is that the first section of each will be of moderate difficulty, okay? So my first verbal section will be middle of the road in terms of difficulty on average. My first quantitative section will be middle of the road in terms of difficulty on average. And then the difficulty of the second section will be determined by how well I do on the first section. Does that make sense? So if I absolutely kill it on the first section, then I'm going to face a pretty difficult second section. If I struggle on the first section, the second section will likely be easier. Note that computer adaptive testing, the SLA, section level adaptation within the GRE, is section independent. In other words, how well you do on verbal is entirely independent of how well you do on quantitative. They're 2 ships passing in the night. They have nothing to do with each other. All right, so how does section level adaptation affect my approach? It doesn't. Don't change your approach based on section level adaptation. Don't waste any time or energy on test day trying to figure out what the test is thinking. That is a fool's errand. The test algorithm is incredibly sophisticated. You can't outsmart it. And if you are doing anything other than trying your hardest to get the questions right, then you have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the task before you. Okay, so let me say that again. Sometimes students think, can I game the system? Can I make it think I'm at a certain level so that then the next section will be easier and I'll score better on it? The answer is, if you have that idea, please disregard it. That's not a good idea. On any given question, what you should be doing is trying to get it right every time. I promise you that's the best way to maximize your score, okay? The benefit of SLA for you is that stupid mistakes don't hurt you as much. And I actually don't even believe in stupid mistakes. I use this phrase as a convenient shorthand for what we mean when we typically say stupid mistakes. But it should bring you some peace of mind that how you do on any one question is not as important on a computer adaptive test. In other words, on the SAT, if I drop a negative sign on one math problem, then the highest I'm ever going to get in the math section is now a 780 instead of an 800. Does that make sense? Whereas on a computer adaptive test, it takes a more sophisticated, more thorough view of my ability. So how I do in any one question isn't as important. Okay. So hopefully that'll bring us some peace and help us relax. All right. Let's see. All right. Let's talk about your pacing. in the quantitative section. You have about 1 minute and 45 seconds per question, as we discussed. And actually, speaking of pacing, let me make sure I understand. I have 1 hour, is that right? Okay. If I have a little time left at the end where I can stay to answer questions, is that cool? Okay, cool. So here's what I'll try to do then. I'll try and finish the me talking part of this by 1. And then if you guys have questions, I'll hang out and I would love to answer.
Would you prefer everyone to just hold their questions for the end and we can do that, or do you want them to just funnel in as you go?
Yeah, no, just throw them in the chat as we go. If they're on point, I'll answer them then. If they are not on point, I will say, hold that thought. I'll come back to that at the end of the class.
Perfect.
Awesome. All right. So you should stick or try to stick to about 1 minute and 45 seconds per question. Note again, though, that you do not need to be tracking that question by question. That's a huge waste of time. Instead, what you need to do is memorize some pacing benchmarks. Memorize some pacing benchmarks. Here's what I mean by that. If I have 1 minute and 45 seconds per question, then that means every 4 questions should take me 7 minutes. Does that make sense? Yeah, absolutely. So we're tracking this. Instead of tracking 1 minute and 45 seconds per question, at that pace, every 4 questions should take me 7 minutes. Is everybody following that? This is how you track your timing, okay? Memorize these before you show up to take the test. What I do when I'm taking a test like the GRE, what I do is the moment the section begins, the very first thing I do is immediately write down on my scratch paper the pacing benchmarks that you see on your screen right here. That is the first thing I do when the section begins. And then I don't have to do any time math for the rest of the section. Once I finish that 8th question, I can flip back to the front of my book and see if I'm on pace. Does that make sense? You do not want to be wasting time or brain power while the clock is running, trying to figure out if you're on pace. Don't do that. If you put in the work beforehand to memorize these numbers, and they're not that hard to memorize, then you don't have to do that time. And notice I've given you the minutes elapsed in the left-hand column and the time remaining in the right. So you can approach it from either direction, either counting up or counting down. All right, cool. Remember, there's no penalty for guessing. If you don't, you know what, I'll stop threatening what I'm going to do if you don't answer a question. Just please, for the love of Pete, make sure that you answer. Let's talk about what your score is in the quantitative section. It varies between 130 and 170. That is what your scaled score does. And that quantitative percentile varies between a 1 and 99. If you're asking yourself, why does the scoring scale start at 130 and why does it end at 170? The answer is there is no reason. It's entirely made up. The scaled score is the bane of my existence as a test prep professional. It drives me absolutely nuts. It means nothing, basically. No, sorry, that's not true. It has no inherent meaning. Your percentile score has inherent meaning. The percentile score is the percentage of other test takers that you beat. Does that make sense? So if I score in the 99th percentile, then I beat 99% of other test takers on that section, right? Whereas my scaled score, it does have meaning, but that meaning is derivative. It doesn't have any inherent meaning. There's no reason for it to start at 130, except that that's the number they picked to start it at. There's no reason for it to end at 170, except that's the number they picked to end it at. It's just like the ACT. If you guys recall, the ACT starts at 400 and ends at 1600. Why? No reason. Just because they don't want to do something that makes sense. They want to pick random numbers. It drives me nuts, but pay attention, especially to your quantitative score. Although the schools that we apply to do often talk in terms of scaled score. So if the schools that you're looking at, if you need to think about your score in terms of the scaled score in order to make sense of what they're telling you, that's fine. And I should clarify, this is not a criticism of any school or any administration at all. I know that they have their reasons for doing that. I just, I emphasize every time I talk about any of these tests that your percentile score is the one that actually is inherent. So keep an eye on that. All right. So let's talk about the question types in the quantitative section. One of the biggest challenges, probably the biggest challenge of the GRE as a whole, is getting familiar with question types. You are going to face concepts that you have been tested on before, but you will be tested on those concepts in new and strange ways that you've never experienced before. Okay. So that's the main thing you got to, or one of the main things that you've got to prepare for if you want to do well on the GRE is these really weird idiosyncratic question types. The first question type I want to talk to you about in the math section, in the quantitative section, is quantitative comparison. What they will do is they will give you two quantities, and then they will ask you which is greater. They'll give you two quantities, and they'll ask you which is greater. For instance, the four answer choices that will always accompany a quantitative comparison question are quantity A is greater, quantity B is greater, the two quantities equal, or we don't have enough information to determine the relationship. Does that make sense? So they might give you two quantities like x squared on the left is quantity A and quantity B is 17. And then they'll give you some other information, and your job will be to evaluate whether, in light of that information, I can figure out which of these quantities is greater. Cool. And again, you've got to master the format of these questions so that on test day, you're only thinking about the math, right? And not about the weird questions. Does that make sense? All right. And then you'll have multiple choice single answer questions. We don't even have to talk much about these. These are classic math questions that you'll face on any standardized test. There will be a multiple choice option. You got to pick one. These are a little bit odder, or excuse me, a little bit more odd. Anyway, these are a little bit weirder. Multiple choice, multiple answer questions. Sometimes they'll give you this very similar multiple choice question, but there is the possibility that more than one answer could be correct. So as you can imagine, those are a little bit more challenging, or they can be anyway. And then finally, we'll have numeric entry questions. These are the ones that I mentioned where you have to type in your own numbers. Okay, so those are the four question types: quantitative comparison, multiple choice single answer, multiple choice multiple answer. And we should note that that means there could be multiple answers. There could also still be just one, even on a multiple answer question. And then, oops, I skipped one. Numeric entry. Numeric entry questions are the ones where you type in a number. Now, another really important thing to talk about here is the topics covered, the content covered in the math section. Some of you will greet this chart with relief for sure, because it shows you that covered on the GRE quantitative section are algebra, arithmetic, geometry, and number properties. Arithmetic means adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, that sort of thing, performing mathematical operations. Number properties can be anything from like even and odd to prime, things like that, factors, multiples, all that good stuff. Note what's not covered though. This might be part of the most, or one of the most important slides in the whole presentation today. You need to know what is not covered on the GRE so that you do not waste your time preparing for the current test. Not covered includes calculus, trigonometry, high-level algebra, and matrices. Thank goodness we do not need to know these things. Okay. All right. So you guys want to do some practice problems? Excuse me. You folks want to do some practice problems? Yeah. Is it too early in the day for this? Take some Tylenol and drink a Gatorade. All right. Let's have at it. Here we go. So question 13 has four answer choices. Select all the answer choices that apply. The correct answer to a question of this type could consist of as few as one or as many as all four of the answer choices. If the lengths of two sides of a triangle are 5 and 9 respectively, which of the following could be the length of the third side of the triangle? Indicate all such lengths. So tell me this, first of all, what kind of question is this? Of the four that we just discussed, what sort of question is this? Yeah, so that actually, and I didn't ask a sufficiently specific question. Thank you, Fitzum. As a practicing attorney, one of my important career skills is to ask good questions, and I just failed to do it. So you are correct. This is a geometry question, but that's actually not the question I was trying to ask. What I meant to say is, of the four formats of the question, which category does this fall into? Yeah, there you go. Multiple choice and multiple answers. So both of your answers are accurate, Fitzum. I failed to ask a specific enough question. Yes, this is a multiple choice, multiple answer question. My job is to pick the one that, pick the answers that represent lengths that could be for the third side of a triangle if its first two sides are 5 and 9. Do you all have any idea what concept is being tested here? Anybody able to spot the mathematical concept that's in play here? We may be flashing back to freshman year of high school here. Math skills, I think, tend to atrophy. That's exactly it, Fitzum. Okay, all right, I see you. Fitzum came with his game face on. I love it. Cool. So yeah, it's the triangle inequality theorem. The triangle inequality theorem tells me that if I have three sides of a triangle, A, B, and C, the length of any two of those sides added together must be greater than the length of the sense. In other words, here's the simplest way to think about it. Let me show you visually. Let's say I gave you these three pieces. good enough. Tell me, can you build a triangle using those three pieces? Can you build a triangle using the three pieces A, B, and C that I've drawn on screen here? I don't think you're going to be able to, right? Why not? Because A and B, even if we laid them end to end, are not long enough to stretch from one end of C to the other. Does that make sense? These two added together are not long enough to connect the two ends of C. And this is just a visual representation of what the triangle inequality theorem tells us. Triangle inequality theorem tells us if you have three pieces, two of them have to be longer than the third for you to be able to build a triangle. Okay, cool. So applying that information here, I know two sides of my triangle are 5 and 9. I think what that means is if I add those two pieces together, they have to be longer than my third side. So 5 and 9 added together was 14. In other words, my third side has to be less than 14, which means I can eliminate answer choice D. But there's another way to apply the triangle inequality theorem here as well. I know that the difference between the two sides I already have is 9 minus 5. In other words, isn't it the case that my third side is going to have to be at least 4 units long to be able to connect a 5 to a 9? Does that make sense? That's 5 and that's 9. Then my third side is going to have to be at least 4 units long to bridge the gap. Are we following? Cool, cool. All right, so if that's the case, then 3 is not an answer either. And my two answers in this multiple choice, multiple answer question would be 5 and 8. I can build triangles with a 5 side and an 8 side as my third side. All right, so we feel pretty good about it with 13? Cool, cool. Let's look at the harder one. Let's see. We don't have that much time. I'll tell you what, we'll do this one. This is a quantitative comparison question. We have in this question two quantities, and our job is to determine which is greater and whether we can even know that, right? Whether we can determine which quantity is greater, and if we can, then which one it is. So A, B, and C are 3 rectangles. The length and width of rectangle A are 10% greater and 10% less, respectively, than the length and width of rectangle C. The length and width of rectangle B are 20% greater and 20% less, respectively, than the length and width of rectangle C. So we need to determine whether the area of rectangle A or the area of rectangle B is greater. What is our feeling? Is there any partial credit? Oh, great question, Shelby. I should have explained that myself. The answer is no. On a multiple choice, multiple answer question, there is no partial credit, unfortunately. In fact, as a general rule, as we'll see when we get into the weird verbal questions, there is no partial credit on any question in the multiple choice portions of the GRE. So I know that's brutal, but remember, everybody faces the same difficulty there, right? So it really doesn't disadvantage you over anyone else. It's just something to be aware. Yeah, absolutely. There's no partial credit for any multiple choice question on the GRE. Okay, great question. So what is y'all's feeling, or what is your feeling for whether we have enough information to determine the respective sizes of these triangles? What do we think? Respective areas of these triangles. Do you think we have enough information? Do you want me to stop asking and just show you? Cool. Let me take a stab at that. Here we go. So first of all, what's the area formula for a rectangle? I think the area of a rectangle is its length times its width. Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, so Fitzum, what you are proposing is a time-honored test-taking strategy where you plug in numbers for the variables to see if you can make the question easier. And I cover that in my classes. That's absolutely a great strategy to go with. If you are interested in using that and you don't already know how, sign up for my GRE class and I'll show you how. But let me show you the formulaic way to do it here too. Isn't it the case that the area of a triangle, excuse me, the area of a rectangle is equal to its length times its width, right? I think so. Okay, so if the length and width of rectangle A are 10% greater and 10% less respectively than the length and width of rectangle C, our first job is going to be to translate this math question to English, right? What on earth are they talking about? I think they're talking about this. The length of A is 10% greater than the length of C. So the length of A is 10% greater than the length of C. How do you increase a quantity by 10%? How do you increase a quantity by 10%? Multiply by 1.1. I see you, Fitzum. All right. Okay. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. So you multiply it by 1.1. Length of A is 10% greater than the length of C. We also know that the width of A is 10% less than the width of C. Okay, so the width of A is 10% less than the width of C. How do you decrease a quantity by 10%? Multiply it by 0.9, right? There you go. There you go. All right. So I think I have formulas for the length and width of A expressed in terms of the length and width of C. Cool. They also tell me the length and width of B are 20% greater and 20% less respectively than the length and width of C. Okay, so the length of B then is 20% greater, or 1.2 times the length of C. And the width of B is 20% less, or 0.8 times the width of C. Does this make sense so far? Cool, cool. Now, we don't know what the actual lengths yet of any of these sides are, but we don't need to know them necessarily. Because my job is now to compare the respective values of the area of rectangle A and the area of rectangle B. But we already know the area formula for a rectangle. It's length times width. So wouldn't then the area of rectangle A be the length of A times the width of A? And wouldn't the area of triangle B, or excuse me, rectangle B be the length of B times the width of B? Sure. Now I can plug in these quantities, and I think that'll help. So I'm going to take the length of B, excuse me, the length of C, and I'm going to solve for it in terms of the length of B. So I take this equation right here and divide each side by 1.2, and I get the length of C equal length of B divided by 1.2. Does that make sense? Cool. I'm going to do the same thing for the width. I know the width of C is the same as the width of B divided by 0.8. All right, and if you're having trouble following that, don't stress. I can teach you algebra and arithmetic as well, or you can find lots of information online that'll help you prepare. Okay, so I now have expressions for the length and width of C expressed in terms of the length and width respectively of B. So I'm going to plug those into these equations over here. I know the length of A is equal to 1.1 times the length of C, but now I have a new name for the length of C. The length of C is also the length of B divided by 1.2. Does that make sense? And now I have an expression for the length of A expressed in terms of the length of B. Now do the same thing for the width of A. The width of A is 0.9 times the width of C, but the width of C can be expressed as the width of B over. Does this make sense? Cool, cool, cool. All right, so I think I'm going to simplify these fractions. So for instance, 1.1 divided by 1.2. Here's where I'm going to use my on-screen calculator. What's 1.1 divided by 1.2? 0.9166. Okay, so the length of A then is equal to 0.9166 the width of B. Excuse me, the length of B. Cool. And then what about the width of A? The width of A is 0.9 over 0.8 times the width of B. So I think that's a 1.125 times the width. And then I will plug those in over here. The length of A times the width of A has now become 0.9166 the width of B, excuse me, length of B, times 1.125 times the width of B. So this is my new expression for the left-hand quantity, for quantity A. Does this make sense so far? Cool. All right, so now all I got to do is multiply 0.9166 by 1.125. What's 0.9166 times 1.125? 0.031. So the simplified version of the area of A, 1.0311 times the area. So are we now able to determine which triangle has a greater area? Yep, that's exactly right. The coefficients are exactly what we're comparing. The implied coefficient over here is 1. The explicit coefficient here is 1.03. So it looks like the quantity is great. Does that make sense? Awesome, awesome. And if you're looking at that thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to get into grad school, don't panic. I or any number of other people can help you understand these things. Especially don't panic because math goes away over time. If you haven't been studying math in college, then you likely have forgotten a lot of what you knew before. The good news is it comes back more easily. It's just like muscle memory. If you have already learned it in the past, then you can relearn it with less effort. But you do have to relearn it. So make no mistake. If you are confused by this, it's absolutely conquerable, but it's going to take some work. Right? So be prepared to put in that work. We don't really have time to do my other math questions, which stinks because I love these. But tell you what, Don't be daunted, Taylor. It's my goal is to give you a brief survey of what you're going to be facing to make sure that you see the nature of the task in front of you. Every time I take on a new tutoring student, the first question I ask them is, what school do you want to get into and what are their admitted students' scores? And then I have them, the first task I have them complete is take a diagnostic test of their own. Because if you're going to have effective prep, you got to start from knowing what you're facing. Does that make sense? So if you feel daunted, I understand. That's okay. You absolutely can conquer it. There's a wealth of information out there from myself and other internet nerds who want to help you get into grad school. Tools are available to you. You just got to put in the work to make use of them. Okay. Cool. All right. And then there's like exponent rule questions as well, which we had time to go over long ago. Okay, so briefly, let me give you a big picture recap of the quantitative section. Here's what you need to know to prepare. You need to know what's coming. There is no excuse for being surprised by what you find on test day. Does that make sense? There's no excuse for it. There is every bit of information you need out there right now about what's going to be on the test. So if you show up to take the test and you're surprised by what's on it, that represents a failure to prepare sufficiently. Same thing with being uncomfortable. Even though it's an uncomfortable experience to take these tests, there's really no excuse for it being weird to you when you do it because you can simulate the real thing, right? If you are taking realistic practice tests, then even though the actual experience is weird and strange, you should be comfortable with it because you've done it in college, right? Solid prep regimens include lots of realistic practice tests. Make sure you're doing that. You need to pinpoint what you know and what you don't. For instance, if you're looking at this question thinking, what on earth? Okay, well, it seems like exponents then are something you need to work on, need to bone up on, right? Cool. So there are a discrete list of topics tested on the test. You need to know beforehand, well in the beginning of your prep, what you need to study because you don't know it and what you don't have to worry as much about because you're already familiar. Have a roadmap. This is really important too. If you are doing yourself justice as you prepare, in other words, if you're preparing thoroughly, there's going to come a day when you're discouraged, okay? When that happens, your roadmap is your best friend. It will help you see what you've already covered. It will help you see what remains to be covered. It will help you zoom out and get the big picture and restore perspective so that you're confident enough to keep going. So you've got to make sure you have a roadmap so that you can see the forest and don't lose sight of it for the trees. All right. Treat it like a job. You know what? You guys don't need me to lecture you on this. You are all professional young persons or aspiring professionals. The fact that you're in this meeting today tells me that you're focused and diligent. So you don't need me to tell you what it's like to treat the test prep as a job. I will just say that the more you can do that, the more successful. And then finally, don't reinvent the wheel. Obviously, as a test prep professional, I am biased when I give you this piece of advice, but it absolutely is true nonetheless. You do not have to reverse engineer the exponent rules. There are lots of us who know them and want to share them. You don't have to figure out on your own how to approach a quantitative comparison question. I would love to teach you, right? So make use of the information available to you. Even if you don't like me, there are other resources out there and you can find me and make use. All right. All right. So let's quickly run through the verbal section as well. Verbal is 30 minutes, 20 questions, which means 1 minute and a half per question, right? A little bit less time per question. It is also multiple choice. The timing that you should use is based on the question type. So we're not going to go over pacing benchmarks for verbal because different questions take you different lengths of time. Scratch papers allowed. It is computer adaptive. There is no penalty for guessing. All that stuff is the same as the math section. All right. Basically, we're going to go over the different question types in verbal in just a second, but your pacing is difficult in the verbal section because different questions take different lengths of time. So your score in the verbal section is between 130 and 170, just like it is in the quantitative section. But again, just as in the quantitative section, the percentile score is the more inherently meaningful number, even if it's not the one we typically discuss. So let's talk about the question types. Reading comprehension questions comprise about half of all the questions in the verbal sections. You'll be given something to read, and then you'll be asked about its content and structure. Reading comprehension questions can have several different forms. You can have a multiple choice single answer. You can have a multiple choice multiple answer, which we've already seen an example of. Or you can have a selecting passage format in which you have to choose in the passage the sentence that best meets what you've been asked to find. Okay. There will be a total of about 10 passages with 1 to 6 questions each. And 1 or 2 of those passages will be longer. There will be approximately 1 argument structure passage, which is a little bit shorter. If you all are at all familiar with the LSAT, this argument structure passage resembles much more closely what you do on the LSAT. The other question, or one of the other question types that we facing is a text completion question. A text completion question will have a passage of 1 to 5 sentences with 1 to 3 blanks in it. There are 3 answers per blank. You do not get partial credit for getting only 1 blank right, Shelby, to answer your question from earlier, right? If I want to get this question right, I have to get all 2 or 3 blanks if there are 2 or 3. There's 3 answers per blank unless there's only 1 blank, in which case there will be 5 answers. Are we picking up on how weird and varied all these question forms are in the verbal section, right? This is another reason that prepping is so important. Even if you have a good vocabulary, if you don't understand the difference between the various question types, you're not going to score as well as you should, okay? So you got to prep. There's a single correct answer consisting of 1 choice for each blank. Partial correct answers receive 0 credit. And we are not even yet to the weirdest question in the verbal section, so bear with me. Sentence equivalence. This is the weirdest one. There will be a single sentence, 1 blank, and 6 answer choices. You have to select 2 correct answers that are equivalent and complete the sentence in the same way. 1 blank, 6 choices. You have to pick the 2 that are correct. Bizarre, right? And one wonders, like, why are they testing us, right? What's the purpose here? The answer is, I don't know. That's not our job. This is just what we're facing, right? Partial answers, again, receive 0 credit, no partial credit. You have to complete the sentence with 2 words that fit its meaning and produce completed sentences that are similar meaning. You nailed it, Angel. It is absolutely weird, very strange. The GRE is entertaining because it's like, even if you know the material, you can just still get super confused by what's happening and have a really bad day, right? So take a look at this. First of all, guys, what sort of the questions do you think this is? Of the 3 we just looked at, right? And we're going to sort them broadly into reading comprehension, right? Sentence equivalence, and text completion. Reading comprehension, text completion, and sentence equivalence. Which one do you think this is? Reading comp, absolutely, you nailed it. This is clearly a reading comp question for sure. And you may be looking at this thinking, this isn't unusual. I've been doing these since 2nd grade. You're not right. You probably have. Excuse me, did I say you're not right? You're not wrong. You probably have been doing these for a long time. I can assure you that they're probably more difficult on the GRE than you've ever faced before. The only time you may have seen a more difficult reading comp question is if you've taken another graduate level entrance exam. But if you haven't, then these are going to be the hardest reading comp questions you've ever seen. Notice we have a multiple choice single answer in number 23. We have a multiple choice multiple answer in 24, and another multiple choice single answer in number 25, except it's kind of an inverted single answer because they're asking us except. The passage provides info on each of the following except. This is almost a 4 right, 1 wrong question, right? The logical opposite of the thing that they had named, the Boolean value they have named, is the one you. So again, if you're looking at number 25 thinking, man, this is strange, again, you're right, and you got to be ready for it. All right, what do we call this kind of question? For 20, what do we call this one? Yeah, text completion, good. Excellent, Fitzim, especially because the difference between text completion and sentence equivalence can be very difficult to keep in mind. But that's important because in this case, I'm making 1 choice for each blank, right? I'm making 1 choice for each of the 2 blanks. Contrast that with this question, in which I've got 1 blank and I have to choose 2 answers that mean the same thing. Okay, so let me just do 2 of these real quick. There's been much hand reading about how unprepared American students are for college. Not at UNLV. I don't know who these nerds are looking at, but not us, right? Graph reverses this perspective, suggesting that colleges are unprepared for students. Also not at UNLV. In his analysis, the university culture is largely blank entering students because academic culture fails to make connections to the kinds of arguments and cultural references that students grasp. Understandably, many students view academic life as blank ritual. Okay, so if the university culture is blank entering students because it fails to make connections to the things that they understand, what word might we plug into that blank? It's failing them, it's letting them down, something like that, right? University culture is largely dropping the ball with respect to entering students, right? So this is a technique in which we answer the question in our own words, and then we choose the answer that most nearly fits our answer choices. We call it pre-phrase. I think that which one of these A, B, and C means something similar to failing students or letting them down or dropping the ball with respect to students? Which one of these captures that? Yeah, opaque too, exactly. Opaque means you can't see through it. If something is abstractly opaque, that means I can't understand. For instance, I love space, but physics are opaque to me, right? I don't really understand physics. I just think space is cool. Does that make sense? Cool. So if university culture is not understandable to entering students, it is opaque. Does that make sense? And so how do they view academic life? They view it as strange ritual. Is that fair? Something like that? Okay. So which one of these means something like strange ritual? Arcane. Arcane. Good. And you may be looking at this thinking, I'm really supposed to know the meaning of the word arcane. And the answer is, if you do, that's great. If you don't, there are strategies you can employ that will allow you to find your way to the right answer, even if you don't know what that word means. Okay. I'm still not even 100% sure what arcane means. I think it means like esoteric, or that doesn't really mean. It means something like bizarre or little known, strange. Yeah. But it fits here. Okay. Cool. All right. And then let's look at this sentence equivalence question real quick, and then we'll go into question and answer. So while in many ways their personalities could not have been more different, she was ebullient where he was glum, relaxed where he was awkward, garrulous where he was blank. They were surprisingly well suited. So in your own words, what should we plug into that blank? It sounds like we're immediately contrasting her with him. She was ebullient, was glum. I'm not even certain what ebullient means, but I think it's the opposite of glum, right? Cool. She was relaxed where he was awkward. Okay, again, we've got opposites. So I think we're looking for things that are the opposite of garrulous. Does that make sense? What does garrulous mean? Something along the lines of like speaking freely and happily. I talk a lot. I'm happy. Yeah, talkative. Very good. Vincent, you're all over it today. I love it. Yeah, so which one of these means the opposite of talkative? Yeah, no worries. Absolutely, Caleb. Or I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If I'm not, yeah, please reach out. All right, so which one of these mean the opposite of talkative? I know laconic does. Laconic means something like using few words, right? Good. So does taciturn. Exactly. Taciturn means I am not speaking. Good. Awesome. So we've nailed that one as well. You'll notice that my big picture advice for how to tackle the verbal section is identical to my big picture advice for how to tackle the quantitative section. That's because these are broad principles of test prep that always apply. There's no excuse for not knowing what to expect. There's no excuse for not having practiced enough to be comfortable. You need to make sure you know what you do know and what you don't know. Yeah, no worries, Alan. Yep, absolutely. Please do. Make sure you have a roadmap and you see the big picture. Treat it like a job and don't reinvent the wheel. Rely on the expertise of others. Tell you what, I'll go ahead and take questions. Let me give you my info. If you're interested in my upcoming GRE course, go to cooperprep.com/GRE. That's where you'll find the product listing. Leave me your info if you want at /GRA. That's where you can just fill in your info and I'll send you the slides. Or feel free to text or call or shoot me an email. All right, guys, that's all I have for you today, but I'm happy to take questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to shout them out.
Thank you so much. That was super informative.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, anybody have any questions, just unmute yourself, go ahead and ask. If you have to leave for another meeting or class, that's totally okay. You can go ahead and do that. If not, we can stick around here, Mr. Cooper, if you have a couple minutes and answer some questions.
Of course. Yeah, I've got all the time in the world. Shout them out. Okay, no worries. Thank you, Angel. I appreciate you being here and your great question. Yeah, of course. Sure. Yeah, please do text me, Fitzham. Absolutely.
Okay.
I think it'll be posted on YouTube, Daniel, but that may be a better question for Alexis.
Yes, it will. This recording is going to be posted on the Graduate College YouTube channel, so you guys can always go back and look at it for reference. So before we formally end today's session, I just wanted to thank our presenter for sharing your time and all of your expertise with us today, and thank all the participants for joining and for asking so many great questions. Before you all log off, I just put a little survey link in the chat. If you could take a couple seconds and fill it out, we would really appreciate that. Enjoy the rest of your day, and good luck on all of your entrance exams.